Embalming is the art and science of preserving human remains by treating them to forestall decomposition. The intention is to keep them suitable for public to display at a funeral, for religious reasons, or for medical and scientific purposes such as their use as anatomical specimens. The three goals of embalming are sanitization, presentation, and preservation. Embalming has a very long and cross-cultural history, with many cultures giving the embalming processes a greater religious meaning. Embalming is distinct from taxidermy. Embalming preserves the human body intact, whereas taxidermy is the recreation of an animal's form, often using only the creature's skin mounted on an anatomical form. History. The Chinchorro culture in the Atacama Desert of present-day Chile and Peru are among the earliest cultures known to have performed artificial mummification as early as 5000–6000 BC. Perhaps the ancient culture that had developed embalming to the greatest extent was that of Egypt, where as early as the First Dynasty specialized priests were in charge of embalming and mummification. The ancient Egyptians believed that preservation of the mummy empowered the soul after death, the latter of which would return to the preserved corpse. Other cultures known to have used embalming techniques in antiquity include those of the Ethiopians, Guanches, Peruvians, Jivaro-Indians, Aztecs, Toltecs, Mayans, Tibetan and southern Nigerian tribes. The earliest known evidence of artificial preservation in Europe was found in Osorno and are about 5,000 years old human bones covered in cinnabar for preservation. But embalming remained unusual in Europe up to the time of the Roman Empire. In China, artificially preserved remains have been recovered from the period of the Han Dynasty, the main examples being that of Xinjiang and the Muangdui archaeological site. While these remains have been extraordinarily well preserved, the embalming fluids and methods used are unknown. In Europe, the knowledge and practice of artificial preservation had spread from these ancient cultures, becoming widely spread by about 500 AD. The period of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance is known as the anatomists' period of embalming and is characterized by an increased influence of scientific developments in medicine and the need of bodies for dissection purposes. Early methods used are documented by contemporary physicians such as Peter Faustus and Ambroise Père. The first attempts to inject the vascular system were made by Alessandro Giuliani of Picito, who died in 1326. Various attempts and procedures have been reported by Leonardo da Vinci, Jacobus Berengar, Bartholomew Eustachius, Rainier de Graaf, Jan Swammerdam and Friedrich Reusch. Modern methods. The modern method of embalming involves the injection of various chemical solutions into the arterial network of the cadaver to prevent decomposition. William Harvey, the 17th-century English physician who was the first to detail the system of blood circulation, made his discoveries by injecting colored solutions into corpses. It was the Scottish surgeon William Hunter who was the first to apply these methods to the art of embalming as part of mortuary practice. He wrote a widely read report on the appropriate methods for arterial and cavity embalming in order to preserve bodies for burial. His brother, John Hunter, applied these methods and advertised his embalming services to the general public from the mid-18th century. One of his more notorious customers was the dentist Martin van Buchel. When his wife Mary died on January 14, 1775, he decided to have her embalmed and turn her into an attraction to draw more customers. Hunter injected the body with preservatives and color additives that gave a glow to the corpse's cheeks, replaced her eyes with glass eyes and dressed her in a fine lace gown. The body was then embedded in a layer of plaster of Paris in a glass-topped coffin. Buchel put the body on display in the window of his home. Many Londoners came to see the body, but Buchel also drew criticism on his gruesome display. A rumor, possibly started by Buchel himself, claimed that his wife's marriage certificate had specified that her husband would only have control over her estate after her death. For as long as her body was kept unburied, interest in, and demand for, embalming grew steadily in the 19th century, largely for sentimental reasons. People wished to be buried at far-off locations, and mourners wanted the chance to display the body for visitors to pay their last respects to. Another motive behind embalming at this time was to prevent the spread of disease while being able to prepare for burial without unseemly haste. After Lord Nelson was killed during the Battle of Trafalgar, his body was preserved in brandy and spirits of wine mixed with camphor and myrrh for over 2 months. At the time of his state funeral in 1805, his body was found to still be in excellent condition and completely plastic. Alternative methods of preservation, such as ice packing or laying the body on so-called cooling boards, gradually lost ground to the increasingly popular and effective methods of embalming. By the mid-19th century, the newly emerging profession of businessmen undertakers, who provided funeral and burial services, began adopting embalming methods as standard. Embalming caught on in the United States during the American Civil War, as a result of sentimental issues involving foreign officials and servicemen dying far from home, and the need for their remains to be returned home for local burial. This period, starting at about 1861, is known as the funeral period of embalming and is marked by a separation of the fields of embalming by funeral directors and the embalming for medical and scientific purposes. Dr. Thomas Holmes received a commission from the Army Medical Corps to embalm the corpses of dead Union officers to return to their families. Military authorities also permitted private embalmers to work in military-controlled areas. The passage of Abraham Lincoln's body home for burial was made possible by embalming, and it brought the possibilities and potential of embalming to a wider public notice. Until the early 20th century, arsenic was frequently used as an embalming fluid, until it was supplanted by other more effective and less toxic chemicals. There were questions about the possibility of arsenic from embalmed bodies later contaminating groundwater supplies. There were also legal concerns, as people suspected of murder by arsenic poisoning could claim that the levels of poison in the deceased's body were a result of embalming post-mortem rather than evidence of homicide. In 1867, the German chemist August Wilhelm von Hofmann discovered formaldehyde, whose preservative properties were soon discovered and which became the foundation for modern methods of embalming, replacing previous methods. Today, modern embalming is most often performed to ensure a better presentation of the deceased for viewing by friends and relatives. A successful viewing of the cadaver is considered to be helpful in the grieving process. It allows the mourners to form a memory picture of the deceased. Embalming has the potential to prevent mourners from having to deal with the rotting and eventual putrescence of the corpse. This view has been challenged, however, by authors such as Jessica Mitford, who point out that there is no general consensus that viewing an embalmed corpse is somehow therapeutic to the bereaved, and that terms such as memory picture were invented by the undertakers themselves, who have a financial interest in selling the costly process of embalming to the public. Mitford also points out that, in many countries, embalming is rare, and the populace of such countries are still able to grieve normally. Embalming is also a general legal requirement for international repatriation of human remains and by a variety of laws depending on locality, such as for extended time between death and final disposition or above-ground entombment. In the United Kingdom, where open casket funerals are extremely rare, embalming is still used in many funeral homes. Terms for embalmers. The roles of a funeral director and an embalmer are different. A funeral director is a person who arranges for the final disposition of the deceased and who may or may not prepare the deceased for viewing. An embalmer is someone who has been trained in the art and science of embalming and may not have any contact with the family, although many people fill both roles. The term mortician is becoming outdated, but may refer either to a funeral director or to an embalmer, or both. Embalming training commonly involves formal study in anatomy, thanatology, chemistry, and specific embalming theory combined with practical instruction in a mortuary, with a resultant formal qualification granted after the passing of a final practical examination and acceptance into a recognized society of professional embalmers. Legal requirements over who can practice vary geographically. Some regions or countries have no specific requirements. Additionally, in many places, embalming is not done by trained embalmers, but rather by doctors who, while they have the required anatomical knowledge, are not trained specialists in this field. Today, embalming is common practice in North America and New Zealand, while it is somewhat less frequent in Europe. In some countries, permits or licenses are required. In others, it is performed only by medical practitioners, and the costs can be relatively high. In the United States, the title of an embalmer is based largely on the state that they are licensed in. At one time in Virginia, Maryland, a funeral director is someone who is licensed only to make arrangements and handle the business side of the funeral home, while a mortician is licensed to do these things as well as to embalm. As recently as 2015, Virginia has required that funeral directors also perform 25 to 50 embalmings as well as 25 to 50 arrangements during their apprenticeships as a requirement for their licensing, culminating in 3,000 hours per apprenticeship. Modern practices. As practiced in the funeral homes of the Western world, embalming uses several steps. Modern embalming techniques are not the result of a single practitioner, but rather the accumulation of many decades, even centuries, of research, trial and error, and invention. A standardized version follows below, but variation on techniques is very common. The deceased is placed on the mortuary table in the supine anatomical position with the head elevated by a head block. The first step in embalming is to check that the individual is in fact deceased, and then verify the identity of the body. At this point, embalmers commonly perform basic tests for signs of death, noting things such as clouded over corneas, lividity and rigor mortis, or by simply attempting to palpate a pulse in the carotid or radial artery. In modern times, people awakening on the preparation table is largely the province of horror fiction and urban myth. Any clothing on the corpse is removed and set aside, and any personal effects such as jewelry is inventoried. A modesty cloth is sometimes placed over the genitalia. The corpse is washed in disinfectant and germicidal solutions. During this process, the embalmer bends, flexes and massages the arms and legs to relieve rigor mortis. The eyes are posed using an eye cap that keeps them shut and in the proper expression. The mouth may be closed via suturing with a needle and ligature, using an adhesive, or by setting a wire into the maxilla and mandible with a needle injector, a specialized device most commonly utilized in North America and unique to mortuary practice. Care is taken to make the expression look as relaxed and natural as possible, and ideally a recent photograph of the deceased while still living is used as a template. The process of closing the mouth, eyes, shaving, etc., is collectively known as setting the features. The actual embalming process usually involves 4 parts. Arterial embalming, which involves the injection of embalming chemicals into the blood vessels, usually via the right common carotid artery. Blood and interstitial fluids are displaced by this injection and, along with excess arterial solution, are expelled from the right jugular vein and collectively referred to as drainage. The embalming solution is injected with a centrifugal pump, and the embalmer massages the body to break up circulatory clots as to ensure the proper distribution of the embalming fluid. This process of raising vessels with injection and drainage from a solitary location is known as a single-point injection. In cases of poor circulation of the arterial solution, additional injection points are used. The corresponding veins are commonly also raised and utilized for the purpose of drainage. Cases where more than one vessel is raised are referred to as multiple-point injection, with a reference to the number of vessels raised. As a general rule, the more points needing to be raised, the greater the difficulty of the case. An injection utilizing both the left and right carotids is specifically referred to as a restricted cervical injection, while draining from a different site to injection is referred to as a split injection. Cavity embalming refers to the replacement of internal fluids inside body cavities with embalming chemicals via the use of an aspirator and trocar. The embalmer makes a small incision just above the navel and pushes the trocar in the chest and stomach cavities to puncture the hollow organs and aspirate their contents. He then fills the cavities with concentrated chemicals that contain formaldehyde. The incision is either sutured closed or, if trocar button is secured into place. Hypodermic embalming is a supplemental method which refers to the injection of embalming chemicals into tissue with a hypodermic needle and syringe, which is generally used as needed on a case-by-case basis to treat areas where arterial fluid has not been successfully distributed during the main arterial injection. Surface embalming, another supplemental method, utilizes embalming chemicals to preserve and restore areas directly on the skin's surface and other superficial areas, as well as areas of damage such as from accident, decomposition, cancerous growth or skin donation. A typical embalming takes several hours to complete. An embalming case that requires more attention or has unexpected complications could take substantially longer. The repair of an autopsy case or the restoration of a long bone donor are two such examples. Embalming is meant to temporarily preserve the body of a deceased person. Regardless of whether embalming is performed, the type of burial or entombment, and the materials used, such as wood or metal caskets and vaults, the body of the deceased will eventually decompose. Modern embalming is done to delay decomposition so that funeral services may take place, or for the purpose of shipping the remains to a distant place for disposition. Grooming. After the body is rewashed and dried, a moisturizing cream is applied to the body. The body will usually sit for as long as possible for observation by the embalmer. After being dressed for visitation, funeral services, cosmetics are applied to make the body appear more lifelike and to create a memory picture for the deceased's friends and relatives. For babies who have died, the embalmer may apply a light cosmetic massage cream after embalming to provide a natural appearance. Massage cream is also used on the face to prevent them from dehydrating, and the infant's mouth is often kept slightly open for a more natural expression. If possible, the funeral director uses a light, translucent cosmetic. Sometimes, heavier, opaque cosmetics are used to hide bruises, cuts, or discolored areas. Makeup is applied to the lips to mimic their natural color. Sometimes a very pale or light pink lipstick is applied on males, while brighter colored lipstick is applied to females. Hair gels or baby oil is applied to style short hair, while hairspray is applied to style longer hair. Powders are applied to the body to eliminate odors, and it is also applied to the face to achieve a matte and fresh effect to prevent oiliness of the corpse. Mortuary cosmetizing is not done for the same reason as makeup for living people. Rather, it is designed to add depth and dimension to a person's features that lack of blood circulation has removed. Warm areas, where blood vessels in living people are superficial, such as the cheeks, chin, and knuckles, have subtle reds added to recreate this effect, while browns are added to the palpebrae to add depth. Especially important as viewing in a casket creates an unusual perspective rarely seen in everyday life. During the viewing, pink-colored lighting is sometimes used near the body to lend a warmer tone to the deceased complexion. A photograph of the deceased in good health is often sought to guide the embalmer's hand in restoring the body to a more lifelike appearance. Blemishes and discolorations occasioned by the last illness, the settling of blood, or the embalming process itself are also dealt with at this time.